Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today I'm very honored to speak once again with Xinshu Dong. He is the CEO of Zilliqa, a very well-known, highly scalable blockchain startup that is all about sharding. So thank you very much, Xinshu, for your time. I really do appreciate you connecting this evening.
Hi, Brad. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here again.
And likewise, mate, it's great to speak with you. Now, you, again, are recognized, very well known in the space as a next generation high throughput blockchain platform. Not really a mouthful, it's something that most of us can understand. Let's talk, though, through the aspect of high throughput, why it matters to be highly scalable, and how you're achieving that through, as we mentioned before, this sharding approach.
Yeah, let's begin with this term called throughput. So what that means?
Sure.
In general, that means how many things you can finish processing within a second. So why this is important? Because if you look at today's Ethereum, it's processing about between 10 to 15 transactions a second. It's all good. But imagine that Ethereum becomes 10 times more popular, 100 times more popular. So that kind of throughput or number of transactions you can process every second can potentially become a bottleneck for further, growth of the network. So that is undesirable. That's why, people have started looking at these different ways to make the blockchains more scalable, yielding higher throughput. So that's what we've been working at. At Zilliqa, the approach we are taking, or the main approach I would say we are taking, is something called sharding, which is sort of to divide the transactions to be processed into different parts of the network and let each part work in parallel. So that's why you achieve higher throughput. Of course, There are many different tiny problems here, how to make it actually work.
And perhaps a way to make it easier for the audience, if they're not technologically savvy or they're not devs, is to regard sharding as splitting, essentially, in the sense that you're trying to really build out the capacity of all your nodes by really focusing on fundamentally clustering, bringing these into groups, focusing on what one node can do rather than all the nodes. So can you talk us through a little bit about how you're approaching this sharding technique?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sharding in some sense is more about splitting, more about how do you split, how do you merge. So this is the basic, principle of divide and conquer. So what happens is you have a blockchain network. That means, it's about, let's say, thousands of computers connected in some way together. Now, this network is given some tasks, a list of problems that they have to work on. They need to work on the problem, they need to work on each of the problems, and then get an answer for each of them. So now, what we do is we divide the network into 10 parts, let's say. And then we also divide the list of the problems to be resolved into 10 parts. And then we assign one set of the problems to each of the parts of the network. And then these 10 parts of the network, we usually call them 10 shards, they can actually work in parallel. So that's the key. So because they're working in parallel on different subsets of the problems, that's why you get high throughput, right? That's very sort of straightforward to understand. Now, the key differences in different sort of methods of doing such sharding is about how do you divide. And after you divide, do we reshuffle things around? And then after you divide, how do we process them efficiently? How do we aggregate all the results from the different shards? So these are sort of the key, we say, uniqueness or the key innovation from, let's say, Zilliqa.
Right, and when we last spoke, which was some time ago, at that time it was quite a novel announcement that you were utilizing sharding, but now we see other blockchains bringing their own approach to sharding, and we'll talk about the specifics of your sharding later. But let's talk about now the context of keywords that you represent on your advertisements through your advertising on websites and other media. You focus on being secure and being fast and decentralized. Talk us through those terms and how important they are to Zilliqa.
I think these sort of are the key offerings from the Zilliqa protocol, because if you do not have to sort of strive for very high security, very high decentralization, you can have many different alternatives in terms of designing the protocol. What do we mean by security? So we think that if you look at the blockchain protocol, it needs to be resilient. It needs to be resilient when nodes somehow, for whatever reason, go down. And then it needs to be resilient when someone, specifically attacks certain parts of the network. That's why when we design our network, we need to make sure that these attacks will be sort of contained within the Zilliqa protocol without be able to do, let's say, double spending.
Right.
So that is a security aspect of it. For decentralization, Zilliqa from day one wants to be a very decentralized protocol. So now we have to think about what that means exactly. You can have a technology or a platform that is ready to be very decentralized, but that does not mean that your protocol, when it runs from day one, will automatically be decentralized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you still need to have a phase where you try to attract more and more people, more and more participants to join the network so that it becomes decentralized. So that is something we are very excited about, because when we launch our mainnet, we are going to bootstrap that phase from, it's the infrastructure is already decentralized, but from a sort of more centralized deployments where it's bootstrapped by Zilliqa itself. In some of our initial sort of miners, we want to make it really like widespread, sort of, people will have different ways to join the network. Then it's very hard to say who is controlling the network per se.
Right, right.
That is the idea.
And we also see that right all the way back to the first iterations of blockchain itself with the conversations of Blockstream, quite simply because there's always oversight or degrees of support, as we say, to try and build these blockchain startups out. And that's what literally what you're saying is that no matter how decentralized one entity wants to be, they have to try and build it. So in that context, some of the things that you really try to address, as I've read, is that you want to address network congestion. You want to also address issues of high transaction fees. So how are you doing those things?
So this is very tightly coupled with the high throughput we're offering. Imagine you have one highway and then you have too many cars, so you got congestion, and then you have tolls. Then you may have a mechanism to say whoever paying the higher toll will get a priority in passing through that highway. So that is a congestion problem. That is also partly the reason for having a high gas fee. So if we build the road to be 10 times wider, and then the cars can pass through much faster, and on the other hand, you don't have congestion, you don't need to have that kind of competition in paying high toll fees. So that is the main idea behind Zilliqa's offerings.
Right, and obviously the key as well is to achieve mass adoption, which is made clear in your white paper and all the other documentation. With regard to that, what's the strategy? How are you getting the word out for Zilliqa obviously it's popular because it did the ICO and everyone was talking about the success of Zilliqa, but right now things are very different with the bear market. How are you maintaining interest? What's the strategy you're approaching? What's the market strategies now to maintain interest and to build and bolster the current status of Zilliqa?
I think that's a key question. If you look into this, whether we are working on scalability, security, decentralization, or in future we may work on other technical aspects of it. The whole purpose of doing this technical innovation is really to drive adoption. We worked on scalability because we thought if we could not solve it, we would harm or hurt adoption of the blockchain. Now that we are almost addressing most of it, adoption becomes something more immediate. So that's the first aspect. We sort of need to address some of the technical hurdles before we can really drive adoption. But now we are, as you said, moving into the second stage where some of the major technical problems have largely been resolved. We are sort of in a ready state to actually see adoption. We are doing this in several aspects. One is that we try to engage the community as much as we can, especially part of the community where they have sort of some interest in building a decentralized use case or decentralized application on top of Zilliqa. Okay. Again, this has to be done in stages. That's why we roll out, I think so far we have rolled out 2 batches of our ecosystem grant. These grant awardees are starting to build that kind of environment on Zilliqa, on top of Zilliqa, so that people can easily build applications. Because I think you can imagine, it's very hard for people to build anything on a bare-bone protocol, right? It's just right. Too hard. It's not speaking the same language as, let's say, application developers are speaking. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, because what I'm hearing is that you're not just focused on the crypto community itself, Xinshu, you're focused also on those that can facilitate and contribute if they have some awareness of how to contribute as a developer, perhaps, really, because again, it's about the practical applications of how they can build upon the Zilliqa network to build out. So are you making it easy through the tools for people to do this? Do you need to be someone who's dev savvy to interact in this ecosystem, or are there facilities in place and as I was saying, tools to make it easy for someone to engage?
Yeah, that is our mission, and I completely agree with you. We are not focusing any specific group of people. We want to build it, in a way that it's very easy for people to interact with. I would say we have not made Zilliqa development super straightforward. There's still some challenge, still some learning curve, but I think we have improved quite significantly in the past year. So we now have some, basic tool chains all available. People can, quickly learn about Zilla and then start, programming for Zilliqa. That's for the developer side. But I agree that there's still room for improvement. We are going to roll out more and more developer-friendly tools and the sort of environments, let's say in the year to come. And on the other hand, we also need to provide, nice, very user-friendly infrastructure for normal users. These people may not be able to program, but they want to use the platform. So these are about, wallets, explorers, or things like that. Yes. I think we have recently awarded, really several teams of really high caliber in building wallets for Zilliqa. If you look at some of the recent versions already released for Zilliqa wallets, they're really great. So if you look at this is sort of one direction we are going with in terms of engaging with the community in different ways. But the focus is always about adoption. The focus is not about, making a hype or things like that, because that doesn't help eventually.
Absolutely. And I've always respected that with you, because certainly this is a free interview. You don't mess around. You don't mince your words. You never have with regard to engaging with the pay-to-play strategy or having paid influencers. You really are all about the real business, the real deal of building the blockchain out.
You're right, because otherwise, eventually none of us can survive. We are this new breed of people having this kind of very disruptive ideas. So we have to prove that we are here for real. Yeah. So that's sort of one aspect. The second aspect is that we're trying to work very closely with certain partners. So these partners have huge, amount of resources that we don't have access to. So put Mindshare as an example. We are working with the Mindshare closely to sort of propose this new way to do digital advertising. They are bringing very important partners such as MediaMath, Rubicon, IAS. So these are all the sort of dominant incumbents in the space. But imagine that we do not have Mindshare. So such things will not be possible because we can provide the best technology in the world. But how can we convince all these big guys to come onto the same platform and run the same trial? It's just not realistic. So we have to work with industry leaders in a sense who have the vision that their industry needs to be revolutionized with different types of cutting edge technologies, blockchain being one. So that is starts another strategy we're going with. And then of course we do many other interesting initiatives. For example, we work very closely with universities. We try to educate let's say students in the universities why you should consider building your next application on a blockchain platform rather than on a cloud. So what are the pros and cons you can consider? We can even do mentoring if you are interested, but you feel you lack some of the skill sets. So I think it's a sort of a whole story of different strategies we are trying with at this stage. Some are making more progress. Some may need a little bit more time to see the results coming from that. But we're very committed to this kind of initiatives.
And clearly, as you're mentioning, this is quite a grassroots movement. This is a nascent technology, essentially, still even in China and even throughout Asia. It's still, I would imagine, quite novel to many people. But in that respect, let's talk enterprise for a moment. What's the sentiment there with regard to Zilliqa? Are you also planning on trying to capture the kind of interest and the potential in that marketplace as well?
Yes, but if you think of enterprise, it's a very broad area. Right. I think with a small team size, with the kind of resources we have, we cannot go full blast on different sectors. Mm-hmm. So we have to be sort of a little more mindful in choosing which sectors that we may see earlier adoption than others. So for example, digital advertising is something we started working on very early, and now we are entering into the gaming industry as well, just to see what are the coolest games that we can build on blockchain. Then we can get players to understand, blockchain is something interesting for their consideration as well. So, and we also have insurance with another company, Immediate, and we also are working with another company called Boat on sort of digital entertainment, things like that. So that's why we pick very specific use cases when we talk about enterprise. And we want to use these examples to drive interest. Because imagine that, let's say we are doing very interesting campaigns with Mindshare and the partners. And then very naturally, some other players in the same advertising space, they'll get interested. So that's why we get emails, get calls that, can we do something similar than that? Maybe we can't do it at this stage because of the limitation in terms of resources. But then Zilliqa is an open platform. It doesn't prevent others from, taking that initiative and in doing something, similar.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, though, in that context, because perhaps it does, in the sense that no doubt, as you were alluding to before, there are those that have that oversight. You as the executive team would have that. Are you vetting these projects because you value the standards, the top tier standard of Zilliqa, so that anything that onboards and is utilizing your technology is not going to impede on your value? Do you vet these very carefully to make sure they do have authentic utility that can stand the test of time in these bear markets? Or do you simply just have a very, light approach?
So if you think about sort of the technical aspects of this, Zilliqa is an open platform. It's open in many ways. The source code is open. We just recently changed the license to GPL v3. That essentially means anyone can take the code and do whatever with do whatever they want with the code. Right. So the second thing is, even for that particular network that Zilliqa is going to run after the mainnet launch, over time, we want it to be decentralized. We are not going to vet in a sense that this app can run, this app cannot run. That's essentially censorship, right? That's exactly what we are against. But there's another aspect, which is, given the limited resources of the core Zilliqa team, what are the projects we want to even work on ourselves, or we want to partner with? These sort of projects need to be good examples. These examples need to be inspiring others to build similar or even greater decentralized applications on Zilliqa. Right? That's the idea.
I see. So essentially, you're really trying to establish a kind of example because you want to show quality. Right. Yes. That makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things I want to talk about that you've mentioned is resources. It sounds like you have, as you mentioned, there is a limitation there. Is that a problem for Zilliqa? Why do you have these limited resources? Can we talk about what you mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a problem, because you always have limitation. Now we have about 25 people, let's say. We have limitations. Even if we have 100 people, we have our limitations at that scale, right? We raised about 22 million USD during our token generation event. And we promised, basically, we want to deliver this, very cool platform with all these new technologies that were not even available at that time. So we have to devote most of our resources in developing technologies, platforms, or things like that. But in the meanwhile, we also need to drive adoption. And in my view, driving adoption does not necessarily mean that you are just build a platform and wait and see. Okay, come, build. That's one approach, of course. But on the other hand, I think we also need to lead by examples, because it will be much easier for people to imagine what kind of applications they can build if we build something. Then that's much more relatable. So that's why we cannot build 10 applications for sure. We have to be sort of selective in terms of what are the limited number of applications we want to build. That is the limitation in terms of resources. Of course, if I have double of the resources I have, I can build more applications for sure. But then there will always be a limit in terms of the total number of things I can do at the same time.
Absolutely, Xinshu. And in that respect, I mean, it's reminiscent of the way in which Da Hongfei led out the first wave of dApps on Neo. Obviously, from that point forth, he did go quiet for quite a long time. And in that respect, do you plan to maintain this level of leadership that you do have in Zilliqa? Obviously, as I said, some leaders have left the party for some time and only just recently come back to suit perhaps their architecture and their plan, but you've always been at the forefront of representing your company. Is that also something you intend to do for the long term?
I think there are also different aspects of this. If you look at Zilliqa as an open source project, I think in the long run needs to be decentralized as well, even as a project. The network needs to be run by different miners. Different people should come in and build applications. Then for sort of the team that is spearheading the project, we need to strike a balance, because if we now say, okay, guys, go and build the network, build everything, we will help you in a sense, but we're not leaded. I think that can be detrimental, because the project is still at a very nascent stage. You need sort of a very strong team to push the frontiers of the technology, the platform, and the adoption. And sometimes you want to execute it in a very efficient way. So that's the purpose of the core team. That's the purpose of me leading the core team, as I see now.
And are you up for the job for the next few years?
Then that's the question, right? Do we want to do this forever? I think that will be not very healthy if after 10 years you're still seeing me, playing this same role. I would hope that we earlier than 10 years later, people should have already picked up. The community can be very strong. If you look at Ethereum, for example, that's a very good example. So Vitalik is not doing everything, right? Vitalik is sort of the visionary. He thinks that where we should be headed. But then many people are building applications, and many people are advocating for the platform. Of course, Ethereum has a much longer history than Zilliqa, but then that's sort of a good example for open source, decentralized projects too.
Sure, absolutely. But what I like from this conversation is your tone. It's quite clear that you're not going away from this project, and that you're cognizant of the imperatives of the media itself, making sure that that the users in the crypto space, those that are even the speculators, are respected, because quite frankly, from the outset, and we can talk about this openly, is that many of the ICOs were not just simply utility token offerings. They just weren't. We can say TGEs, but they have a security nuance right from the go-get. And in that respect, people did expect some sort of increase in value. So in that respect, they are waiting there to find out from people like you, are you here to support whilst this is in this nascent phase? So that's what I'm hearing from you. Let's talk about now your nature as a layer one solution. Obviously, you want to maintain yourself as a leading layer one solution to onboard. Talk us through what it's like to be one of the first to build out this sharding technology, and what it means to be layer one.
Yeah, I think one keyword I have is this is very, very challenging. So I think many of the technologies we are building now have been talked about in the past, but have never been built. So we're actually doing something, one of the kind. We have to figure out many of the details that people have not even discussed in detail about. So that's if you look at 2018, that's most of the things we have been working on in that particular year. Now that we have mostly solved this, more of the greatest technical challenges, I would call them. The road ahead of us is more about driving adoption. I think for layer one protocol, that's the key. And for us, I think we have our specific objectives, which is to be a very sort of highly scalable and highly secure platform. We do not want to just target the total number of let's say decentralized applications on the platform, because we want to target specifically those applications that will require the high throughput and high security offerings we have on Zilliqa.
I see.
So that is our mission, and that's what we've been working on. As I said, we are partnering with different apps, and we are thinking of driving this force by leading by example. And then we are trying to make the job much easier for developers to realize their ideas on the Zilliqa platform by providing better tools to them.
Well, let's talk about numbers for a moment with TPS. Now, some have said to me in the past, different CEOs, that really extensive, really exacerbated TPSs are not necessary. And I've seen some of the numbers on your charts and on your website. What's the kind of capacities now, and what does that mean in terms of applicability and usability? Are you meeting your targets for seamless usership with the current amount of applications that are onboarding? So
that's a reality, as you mentioned. I think as you mentioned, it was echoed by many leaders in the space. Yes, scalability is a key problem. But on the other hand, I think adoption is something of greater importance, because if you look at the number of transactions that we are going to get, or other blockchains are going to get on their platform, so you don't need, let's say, 5,000 TPS, 5,000 transactions per second, because you don't have
currently
you don't need it. You don't have that kind of transactions. What Zilliqa provides is in a sense, forward-looking, future-proof. We want to make sure that when we reach thousands of transactions a second requirements, we are here and we are ready. But on the other hand, I think something around hundreds of transactions a second is really what we should be looking forward to in the next, let's say, 2 years' time. So once we reach there, then of course we need high capacity. But before that, if you look at Ethereum, unless when it's really congested, it's about 10 transactions, 15 transactions.
Yeah, it's not much.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
it was never much of a problem until CryptoKitties came along. And then we suddenly realized that there was a huge problem. And that's really why you're so relevant, because you allay some of that problem, because you solved that congestion issue through sharding.
Yes. And I would not call this problem like a problem today, but maybe this is a problem like 2 years later. But if you don't get this infrastructure right today, it's very hard for you to fundamentally change your protocol afterwards.
Right.
And I think what we can see probably is that some of these applications will definitely require more on-chain transactions. That's why they are going to boost the TPS on the blockchain. In some of the use cases, although they may be high throughput, but they don't have to require every transaction to be recorded on the chain. So that can be off-chain or in different other ways. So then they will not significantly boost the on-chain TPS per se. So I think we're really entering this stage where people are being more realistic. People are being more sort of careful in terms of design their protocols, because running transactions on any public blockchain will definitely have some cost associated with it, whether it's transaction fee or it's some other fee sort of implied by developing the applications, or it's about the infrastructural cost by changing your current enterprise system to be completely on the chain. So I think very likely it's going to be case by case model for different use cases, and sometimes it can even be a hybrid model of some on-chain infrastructure and off-chain infrastructure.
Right.
That's for the time being. But of course, as someone working in the space, definitely we are looking forward to more radical, more disruptive applications in future that are going to be completely running on the blockchain as a purely decentralized application.
Well, let's talk about that in the context of the current verticals that you focus on. You mentioned gaming, digital advertising. There's also payments as well. Now, what's the plan for 2019? Obviously, you have some already onboarded. Are you currently talking to any other dApps that can append? And what's the expectation in terms of numbers? Does it even matter? But what can people expect as users and those who like your platform?
Certainly. We are speaking with many different players in these vectors, sectors, as I just mentioned, and they clearly have different views in terms of TPS requirement. But as I mentioned, TPS is just one aspect they are looking at. There are many other aspects in terms of, let's say, costs. If you look at Zilliqa has a completely different mining infrastructure and design than Ethereum. So I imagine that the transaction cost per transaction cost on Zilliqa is going to be significantly lower, which is good news. But on the other hand, maybe you can't expect that you can just, as one application, you send millions of transactions a day on Zilliqa, because although per transaction cost is low, but if your volume is huge, then the cost can still be very high, collectively speaking.
Right, so but if we can, sorry to interrupt, but if we can go to the empirical evidence, though, that's what I was really alluding to. Now, obviously, you've already got some dApps appending to your blockchain. Now, as we move into 2019, you're the CEO, you're receiving those calls and the interest, and you're leading those boardroom discussions. Are you getting more dApps that are likely that are lined up in a queue? That's really what I'm alluding to. Do you have a lot more planned for 2019, and can you give us hints on what's coming?
So one interesting aspect is decentralized games on the blockchain. But again, we have to be realistic, because if you want to design a great game, one important aspect is user experience. you can build the most decentralized game in the world, but maybe players don't like it for whatever reason, because it's becoming slower, it's more costly, you know, playing battles or things like that. So it has to be sort of a carefully designed model where some parts are running on the chain, some parts are not necessarily running on the chain. So that's something we're going to onboard, of course, in 2019. We want to have games so that, you know, people can have a feel of Zilliqa platform. What that means to be playing a decentralized game on a high throughput blockchain. And then another very interesting aspect we're looking at is sort of allowing people to issue tokens and treat tokens that are backed by assets, you know, security tokens. That's an example.
Right.
Because these tokens have, you know, some fundamentals, especially financial fundamentals that, you know, certain group of people really prefer, because that's closer to their mindset, closer to their expertise, closer to their experience. So they are very familiar with dealing with, you know, traditional assets in a sense. But then blockchain can really make that kind of process more transparent, more efficient, and can even lower the cost. So these are some of the applications that we're going to onboard as well in 2019, I would say.
I say, well, let's talk about that in the context of regulation. Now, you're currently based in China, is that correct?
We are based in Singapore.
Oh, you're based in Singapore. My apologies. Now, obviously, the registrations, the requisites there are very different to China, which is important. But I want to talk about the fact that you are within that Asian space as well, because what my understanding is that China itself is pro-blockchain, but quite averse to even crypto itself in terms of the tokenization aspect. So how are you going to navigate through that and mitigate some of the risks there, given that they have their own agenda, their own position, their own law? And then also, how are you going to sort of cater for the diversity of legislation internationally, whereby the US has the unique position with STOs, and then we see others that are in Europe, for example, that's much more open to utility tokens. What's the plan as you move out globally?
Right. I think that's a very important question. And that's something we've been thinking about strategically as well. I'm not very sure about the regulations in China, but, you know, I heard something as you just mentioned. But Singapore is a unique jurisdiction, I would say, because the regulators here are very forward-looking. So do you want to create an environment where innovation can happen smoothly? So, for example, they have different programs, including a sandbox where you can, you know, enter and do something that's currently, let's say, not legislated yet, but, you know, they will give you exceptions where you can try out in this kind of sandbox environment. And then you need to meet all the regulatory requirements along the way before you can graduate out of that kind of sandbox. So that's a very interesting program. I think some of the other countries have similar programs. But I would say that really, very likely, I think Singapore can be a leading jurisdiction in facilitating this kind of asset-backed tokens to be offered and traded to, of course, eligible holders. And
that is exciting to know. That is exciting to know, because you're so close to Europe as well, and that all of that market's opened up because of the openness that Singapore has to blockchain.
Right.
But what about crossing? Sorry,
exactly.
What about crossing the Pacific? How's that going to play out? Because they are not like that. The SEC's made it very clear that most of the ICOs that have pre-existed have been securities. The CFTC is also watching with their recommendations for very few to be commodities. So what's going to happen for the way in which you interact with the US? Because it's a huge market. Right.
I think there are many players. I would say there are maybe the most players in US who are looking at, you know, asset-backed tokens, which are going to be compliant with the securities laws there. So we actually spent some time in speaking with quite many players in the field in US. I think they are all very excited about the opportunities ahead. So because, you know, US traditionally speaking is a huge market. It's you know, no doubt it's the biggest market in the traditional financial service sector. So I think something can happen there in US. We are going to work with maybe some partners in US to forge the connection between the Asian market and the US market. Of course, you know, that's going to require a lot of effort. that's going to require a lot of clarity in terms of compliance and regulation. But that's a potential direction we can work on.
Right. Well, it's great to know that's even possible, because there can be those intermediaries and third parties that can facilitate essentially you crossing again into the US market, which will be exciting to see. Do you expect that to happen anytime this year, or is that something that's a little bit more long term?
It's very early stage. We are just having very preliminary conversations. We are doing some exploration. So really, I can't give you a timeline yet.
No problem. Well, let's talk about now your consensus. I want to talk about this in the context of the narratives we hear recently of POWs and POSs not really being the best fit. Because obviously you're different to that. You've extended beyond this into a unique consensus mechanism. Talk us through why you think that your consensus is more applicable, if you do.
Right. I mean, our overall consensus protocol, if we call it, is like a combination between proof of work, POW, and something called practical presenting fault tolerance, PBFT.
Sure.
So we use POW to be the gatekeeper. If you want to join the network to run PBFT, practical presenting fault tolerance, you have to go through POW first. Of course, you don't have to keep doing that. You just need to do it once every hour or once every 2 hours. Once you get in, you can participate in the rounds of PBFT to actually reach the consensus. The reason for doing this is that if you just use POW for both gatekeeper and for consensus itself, you are going to cause a lot of electricity, which sometimes is undesirable for different reasons. We want to be clean, we want to have lower energy footprint. Then that's why we pair POW with PBFT. PBFT is a message-based protocol. You send messages across to other nodes participating in the same consensus, and then eventually you can get the agreement, which does not cost as much electricity as POW, because it's not like solving a puzzle. So that's the choice of our current consensus protocol. And of course, we are not completely immune to sort of some of the criticisms of POW, because we're still relying on POW. For example, if there are more than 2/3 of the guys hashing power in technical terms,
that's not a good sign.
Yeah, then that's not a good sign, right? You may still be susceptible to the attacks. That's why we need to be very careful in designing the protocol to mitigate that kind of risks. And we have actually designed a very careful bootstrapping phase for the initial mainnet launch to make sure that we can safely go through that kind of procedures and land in a more secure networking environment.
Well, that's good to hear, because obviously we've even seen with Ethereum Classic susceptible recently. So it's quite a serious thing, that given that you are using the POW model, but clearly you're building in those through the bootstrapping, the right strategy. And that's going to be important for those who are investors or users of your platform. Now, let's talk about some of the concerns you have with regard to the smart contracts of other iterations we've seen, because the way you do your smart contracts is unique with your Silas and Automata system. Talk us through the problems of other smart contracts and your solution specifically.
So the reason for designing Zilliqa is that at the very beginning of the project, we wanted Zilliqa not just to be fast in terms of high throughput, but also very secure. I mean, part of the reason is that I think more than half of the team members are from the cybersecurity background. So we are just very familiar with what things can go wrong, where things can go wrong. And we find that it's critical to really secure the smart contracts, because that's a programming layer. That's the layer where your business logic is going to be codified. If we don't secure that very properly, when we talk to, let's say, enterprise users, or even decentralized applications that deal with anything monetary, it's going to be a problem, because nobody wants to lose money because of a bug in smart contracts. Right. So that's our mission. And then there are different choices. For example, you can work on securing the existing smart contracts by, let's say, security auditing, or some tools which can heuristically look for some of the potential vulnerabilities. That's one thing. But we want something that's more fundamental. We want something that can give us stronger guarantees. That's why we designed Zilliqa. So if you program in Zilliqa, of course, you avoid many of the issues that you may have today. But that's one thing. Another important thing is, once you program in Zilliqa, we can formally verify many interesting properties, correctness and security properties of your smart contract programs.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means by formally verifying is that if you're programming Zilliqa, then we can use mathematical tools to do some kind of proof. So we can prove that this program definitely satisfies certain properties. That is a much stronger guarantee than say, okay, I look at a program, I do some testing, I probe here and there, it seems fine. These are two completely different scenarios.
Right.
So that's why we are very proud of Zilliqa.
And clearly also being randomized as well in the approach you've made to verification as well is important, because that adds to the flavor of decentralization itself.
Yeah, I think in some sense, because if you really want to have a decentralized platform, you better have some code running there that is sort of trusted by different parties, right?
Right.
So once you have Zilliqa, you can actually verify. We can verify, you can verify, anyone can verify.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk now about testnets and mainnets, because obviously you've had a process where you've built on each iteration of testnet. You're now at that version 3, is my understanding, and mainnet's coming. So let's talk about what that means for Zilliqa and how important it is to push through into mainnet.
Yes, I think mainnet is a key milestone for Zilliqa, but I think sometimes we are using this term mainnet for different meanings, because I guess we are not actually delivering a very mature network as robust and as stable as Ethereum by 31st Jan this year, because it's a project that has just been slightly more than 18 months, I think. So there's a lot of improvements to be done, a lot of refinement to be done even after the mainnet launch. We have a clear list of tasks we have to work on. But when we call it mainnet, what we really mean is that I think after the mainnet is launched, the network is going to honor all the historic blocks generated after the launch. I think that's important. That's a key difference between a blockchain network and, let's say, another software application like your Microsoft Word, because you can launch your Microsoft Word and then you can have bugs and you fix it. That's not a big deal. But when you launch a blockchain network and you call it mainnet, the records, the blocks generated by the blockchain network going forward are considered perpetual, because you have to honor it. Even if you have bugs, you fix the bugs, you cannot change the records that are already produced in the blocks. So that is the key difference between a testnet and a mainnet, I would say. It's not about functionality, not about feature set, not even about performance. It's about this thing.
I see. So you're really accountable at that point because of the immutability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, immutability. And then I think the second interesting thing about the mainnet launch, that's our excitement, is that we have been talking about all these cool technologies, sharding, smart contract, things like that. They are all very challenging tasks we have sort of accomplished, and we already tested them in testing different scenarios. But now it's really the time that they come to life. People can really use it. People can really build real decentralized applications by leveraging these high throughput or high security technologies. I think that's very interesting. It's for the first time in history that people see these applications really being used in the production system.
Right. So in that context with the mainnet, is 2009 essentially the best year for Zilliqa to showcase what it actually is designed for? Is it fair to say that 2018 was infrastructural, building out the capacity, but mainnet and post-mainnet is really showing what the platform's designed to actually do? And I literally mean do in terms of use.
Yes. I would personally call the year 2019 the year of realization. It's a realization of our dreams. It's a realization of all the designs we had. So everything is coming true after the mainnet launch.
Right. Now, what about the bear though, given the bear market and also the correlation or the anomaly of the correlation between the token value and what you're actually about to do? Can you talk us through that? Because a lot of people just don't understand that whether or not there is indeed an actual correlation between the utility token itself and what you do this year and beyond. I
think this is, again, sort of a subject topic. Different people may have different views. At Zilliqa, our view is that we are committed in building this platform and driving adoption for this platform to make it really useful and usable. So whether it's a bearish market or it's a bullish market, it doesn't really affect our commitment and our progress in any way, I would say. Mm-hmm. But we also recognize that sometimes people get more excited about things when there's a bullish market. Then everyone wants to say, "Hey, can I try blockchain? Can I think about something interesting to build on Zilliqa?" And then where it's a bearish market, you will get less of such requests. But I think it's fine. When we are under such bearish market conditions, when people are still interested in exploring ways to build decentralized applications on Zilliqa or trying to make Zilliqa better, I think that's genuine interest. And we don't have to work with 1,000 teams. We have limited capacity. We can only work with 10 teams, 20 teams. So I think although there is some reduced interest, I would say, but maybe that's what we need. We don't want all the hype, and then we don't know what to choose, where to go.
It could be just a process of cleaning, sweeping out those who aren't really there for the long term and understand the premise that you stand for, and those that are alongside you trying to build out long-term projects. But in that context, though, I still want to allude back to the token, because I'd really like to hear your response to the correlation. How do let's say, for example, dare I say, investors or users and supporters of the utility, how do they understand the correlation between the actual value of this utility token that's going to come to the fore as a true utility? As you build out more and more and more, it's going to be an authentic utility. It's going to switch from that security-like structure. So how can they continue to see that correlation between the growth of your company and the growth of that utility value?
I'm afraid the can only see that kind of vision that your token is a utility token that's really going to give utility to the token holders only when they see substance in the development of the project. So in other words, for Zilliqa, for example, they can only see the value of the utility token of the Zilliqa token if they see interesting applications running on Zilliqa, and people are using the ZILs to fuel the gas, fuel the transaction fee that powers sort of the business logic of such applications.
Right.
I think to me that's the only way. Without that, it's very hard to say that it's not about speculation.
Absolutely. Well, you must be excited about this transition into mainnet and beyond. Now, obviously, another big thing that you've made a claim to, or the team has, is that your focus is on the real life. That's the buzzword that seems to come from the team, and real value and real world. So perhaps real is the catch cry, the catchphrase for 2019 for Zilliqa.
Yeah, realization.
Okay, well, let's talk about specifics in terms of some of your key features with regard to specifics, breaking down sharding. Now, you have transactional sharding, you have computational sharding. Talk us through why you have different types of sharding and what they're for.
So network sharding is at the network level. When you shard, you have to divide the network into different groups. So the network has, let's say 10,000 nodes, and then divide them into different groups so that each group can work on different problems. So that's a network sharding level. And then transaction sharding means that you have a list of transactions to be processed. Now you already have different groups of the network, so that you can divide the transactions and then send each group a subset of the entire list of the transactions. And we also have smart contracts, so we actually have to work on how do you split the smart contracts. How do you ask each of the groups of the nodes to process certain parts of the smart contracts, and then eventually how do we correlate the results from different groups. So these are sort of the different levels of sharding.
Okay, so obviously there are different parts. Now, what about with regard to, I was reading that an article recently written with regard to 5 nodes, 5 node typologies or types. They were written as shard nodes, directory service nodes, lookup nodes, seed nodes, and archival nodes. Why are all these categories existent? What are they all for?
So they exist for many different practical reasons. So for example, we do not want all the nodes to open a port listening, and then everyone can flood transactions and sort of destroy the functionalities of these nodes. So we want to have some level of protection, at least in the initial phase when we launch the blockchain. That's why we shield most of the nodes away from interactions with anyone else in the world. That's why we have different types of nodes. And another thing we need to look at is when we talk about high throughput, there is a side effect, which is that if it's really very high throughput, we are also generating a huge volume of data onto the blockchain. Do we want to ask every single node in the network to store every piece of data? No. The answer is probably no. So that's why we need to have different types of nodes. Some nodes, for whatever reason, they need to have the entire history. Let's say they are a crypto exchange or they are a block explorer. That's why they need to know the entire history. But for most of the nodes, you don't need to know the entire history. You just need to know the most updated states so that they can process new transactions or new smart contracts. Right. That's why, again, there's some differentiation. And then when you organize these nodes together, you also need to have, certain nodes who is playing a major role, sort of sending data to others, coordinating the process, and some nodes are forwarding messages around. That's why we have different types of nodes.
I see.
This may not be the cleanest solution eventually, but this is something I think is very practical in terms of performance, in terms of security. And we are definitely committed in trying to see whether there are alternatives, especially in the more efficient distributed storage side.
Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting to see how you progress and build out the capacity of the nodes and how you define them in the future. Let's talk now about your team. Now, you are well known to have immense experience. So is the team. You have a lot of advisors, perhaps too many, some might argue, but you have a lot and you have a lot of members in your team. What's the plan though? And what's the core foci in your team with regard to the verticals of engineering, of marketing, of technology, of research? What's the key assets of your team and what's the plan in terms of growth? What can you afford for 2019?
I think we are stabilizing the team structure in a sense, as well as the size of the team. We are going to hire a little bit more this year, but we are not going to hire massively, especially if you consider many other teams now are cutting in terms of the size, but we are still growing. So I think our focus for this year, is still driving adoption. Of course, to drive the adoption, you have to get your platform right. You still have to invest most of your resources into developing the platform. But on that hand, driving adoption also requires people to go out and talk to developers, understand their concerns, understand their requirements. That's why we have a developer marketing team. And we also need to have business development team to talk to enterprises or other use cases. Right. And we may also market specifically to certain verticals because, one is about generic marketing, but two is about, let's say we want to specifically target, let's say digital advertising, that's something we work on. If we want to target in gaming, we want to, definitely market the games that are going to onboard on Zilliqa, try to get more users, driving adoption, that kind of idea.
That makes a lot of sense. And you've also been busy trying to spread the word of the performance and achievements of Zilliqa. I noticed that there were parties from your team at the recent ETH Singapore events. And in the future, you're also planning quite a few things as well. Talk us through what conferences, what academic activities you'll be doing in the future to really promote it, and also what other things are you onboarding, like tools and libraries. I've read about the Scylla interpreter that's coming. So what are all the things you're planning?
Yeah, there are many things, as you mentioned, conferences. We are probably going to be more and more selective in terms of finding the best venue where we can talk about Zilliqa, we can interact with other key players in the field, we can reach out to developers, for example. So we are going to Token 2049 conference in Hong Kong, and some of our key members are going to a UK event very soon this month to share our views on security tokens. And I think there is also a developer, I think it's called Developer Week in San Francisco in the first quarter as well. So these are the sort of key events we're going to attend for the first quarter. And definitely we'll plan for more events from second quarter onwards. But on the other hand, you just mentioned the word academic. I think that's important as well. So once we get more bandwidth, we are going to sort of work more closely with the academia to tackle some of the most challenging problems as well. You know, we have enough problems to work on. Last year we did not have all the time to tackle them, but this year maybe we'll have more time, more bandwidth. So yes, we are going to try to make more contribution to the general academic community as well. And on the other hand, I think keep constantly reaching out to developers and sometimes supporting them via the ecosystem ground is definitely one of our focus areas as well.
Absolutely, and it's good to hear that you're also having those discussions in the conference space with STO, because it is coming, there's no question of that. And clearly your platform's open to the possibility, given that you are in Singapore, in the literally almost in the central point of all blockchain startups and initiatives. You're in a great location globally, and no doubt there's going to be a lot of interest in the future for that. Let's talk now about your partners. I really wanted to get very frank here. I've looked through the extensive list, and I hope you don't mind, we're going to go here, but FBG is on the list. I have to mention this, 8Decimal, DHVC, Talenta, list goes on, but I really want to talk to you about FBG, particularly given that there's been a lot of discussions of late, and even past in 2018, with regard to pumping and dumping. And now I'm not alleging that FBG do it, but there are many who do. So I've had a look at your coin market cap. There's been a significant change in the price of the value of this utility. Are you concerned that some of these VCs could have effectively just dumped the value because they didn't really value you long term, but really just cared about money?
I think it's very hard for me or for the team to know exactly whom. And unlike some other teams, I think they try to figure out. We didn't even try to figure out how many tokens are held by whom, what's the movement or things like that. So really we don't know. But
how did it make you feel though, knowing that some of them did?
Of course, I want everyone to hold more and more ZILs. But on the other hand, if you understand ZIL has limited supply, we also want ZILs to be in as many hands as possible, so that they can use the ZILs to really have the utility. Because when you send transactions, you have to give ZILs. When you run smart contracts, you have to give ZILs. So I'm not too worried about that. I would say definitely ZILs will have these own movements. And as I said, I don't know exactly what that kind of movement was.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the propensity for improvement, or if that's even your position. Now, you're quite low in value in comparatively to where you were in January of last year in 2018. So even though perhaps most CEOs don't like to talk about price, and I understand that, do you anticipate a change given that you're moving into mainnet and beyond? Obviously, this is something important to those who've invested in Zilliqa from the outset.
I look at it from, for example, another perspective. If you look at the sort of ranking, I think we are quite stable in the past few months. Of course, there's some up and downs, but we're quite stable. I would see that as some recognition of the community that this project, is progressing. This project is doing something very interesting. I think that would be one metric we can look at. What's going to happen after the mainnet? That's really a very hard question. Different people are sometimes talking about different possibilities. I'm not sure which one is, really going to be the case. Sure. Yeah, and sometimes it's really out of the team's control.
And what do you think about the relationship between what many deem as altcoins, as grouping everything but BTC, and this almost pegged association with the movement of BTC? Is it something that concerns you, that we see these typical green and red runs in those two camps?
I think it's also natural to me, because if you look at BTC, that's essentially the first public blockchain, right? I mean, before that it was just all ideas, but this one is real, and I think it's revolutionary in its way. It's from 0 to 1. It's very important. I think that's probably the main reason that people recognize a decentralized blockchain work can bring value. So I see that BTC has sort of its value from being the first. Then for other altcoins, as you mentioned, I think many of them have yet to prove their level of contribution to the revolution as much as BTC. So that's why we really need to work on making the platform better, running interesting applications, and eventually running interesting applications that are transacting interesting value, right? So
Sure.
before we can achieve that, I think it's natural to see what you just described.
Sure, but I want to get Frank again. Now, obviously, you've read the Nakamoto Protocol, you've read that initial white paper. Many people around the world have different viewpoints on this, but the reality is that BTC, for the most part, right now, is treated as an SOV, as that digital gold in that continuum that it's potentiated to, evolve into other typologies. It may become, what it's designed to be, in that it is a currency for the people at some point in time. But right now, it's not functioning like that. So why is it that Zilliqa is potentially beholden to this store of value, this speculative instrument that is currently what BTC is, in that everyone's trying to hope that it will increase in value? We constantly hear that narrative in the ecosystem that is crypto. So why is it that Zilliqa, it seems to move and oscillate, why the market moves between BTC and everything else?
I think there can be different reasons. The element of speculation can be one of them, and I think as what is clear to us, Zilliqa still has a lot to do to prove its sort of independent value. It's clear that technologically speaking, Zilliqa is a different platform than, let's say, Ethereum, than Bitcoin. But then the concept, in many people's views, is similar. It's, to them, maybe it's just yet another blockchain. So before we can actually show to the world that the kind of applications or the kind of value we are going to create by having this kind of technological platform is fundamentally different or goes beyond what Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other blockchains today are offering, I think it's also hard for people to really distinguish that. Right. You mentioned you spend a lot of time in understanding what Zilliqa is about, what is Sharding about. Many people will not have that kind of luxury of time and sort of even resources or knowledge to distinguish between different projects. That's why, if you just look at the trading value of different tokens, there is some strong correlation today. Right.
So do you think in the future it's possible that Zilliqa can operate independently and have its own value in its own ecosystem, irrespective of the movement of, let's say, Ethereum or BTC?
I do not imagine that in a very short term we will be completely sort of independent, because I think we should pay tribute to all these precursors in the space. They did a great job in bringing blockchain to everyone's attention, at least. But now we need to go beyond that and take the next step, which is to bring the blockchain technology to everyone's life. Right. So I think we are still part of the same revolution. I would say we are part of the process of decentralizing applications, decentralizing transactions, decentralizing the ways people do business. Right. I think there will still be some relationship, and we should help each other.
Absolutely, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, those that are helping obviously have a lot of partners, and you've mentioned Mindshare, you have Asteria, LayerX, and DMM as key partners that are really facilitating. But let's talk about the number of dApps that you have. Currently, how many have you got in number, so people can be aware of how successful you've already been?
We haven't launched our mainnet, so we don't even have a number yet.
Right. So, well, you have some already advertised that are coming. So talk about what's about to come.
So I think we'll have a few games, probably even in Q1 or early Q2. We have a bunch of games running on Zilliqa, and then we are going to run a trial run for the Mindshare application. So in at least in Q1. So that's another key application we have. And as I mentioned, we have Immediate, we have Boat, and then there are some others listed on our webpage. There are some applications that we are still in discussion phase, but I think we're going to announce more applications along the way.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about those, and don't think you can certainly call me if you want to announce anything big. But let's also talk about the imperatives of the NFT. You alluded to the importance of gaming. You must be a proponent of what really can happen with those non-fungible tokens.
I think that's very interesting. So, if you look at their smart contracts, they may not be too different, but then I think NFT enables a quite different sort of applications than fungible tokens. For non-fungible tokens, every piece of thing can represent a virtual asset, a virtual item that will live, on the blockchain forever. So that kind of idea, I think, is interesting. So today, if you're relying completely on a particular company, that's something, quite risky, because if the company has any issue or has another business decision to sort of discontinue any kind of games, the value of these virtual assets will be significantly impacted. But if you have a blockchain that can give life to all these kind of virtual assets, and then these assets can go sort of across the boundaries of particular games, but live in different games, I think that's quite exciting for many gamers.
Absolutely.
That's at least a clear use case for non-fungible tokens.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, there are other...
Well,
go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, it's certainly exciting given that the ownership component as well, in that not only can you potentially port into other games, but you can carry the ownership of those assets, especially if you've created them.
Right, exactly. So I think that's a very promising direction for decentralized games on blockchain.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk now about some of the concerns perhaps you may have. Now, I went through and had a look at your advisors. Now, you have some advisors. One of them I found interesting. His name's Nikolai Oster. He is head of ICOs in the Bitcoin Suisse. Again, given the narrative we've seen of ICOs just generally, are you concerned at all about that? And also Loi Lu, he's the advisor for Kyber. Kyber obviously is a prominent, well-known decentralized network, but again, has interest in another project. So are there any concerns you have with any of the advisors, given that their interests don't just lie with Zilliqa?
Not really. I mean, Nikolai advises us a lot in terms of the token sale process and how can we do it in a very compliant way. So that was, I think, back in 2017 and early 2018. Loi has always been our friend. We were from the same lab. Of course, he's CEO of Kyber Network. That's where, most of his energies goes. But then he definitely gives us a lot of connections, especially because he entered this space earlier than us. And sometimes when we have questions, we can just ring him a bell. So he's always there to help.
Right.
He's not here running the project, of course.
Okay. Now, again, to be frank, have you copped any criticism for Vincent, the CEO or the executive of FBG, being an advisor in the Zilliqa, leadership design?
Not really.
Okay.
I don't hear any criticism of him being an advisor.
Right.
On the contrary, I think he's very helpful to the development of Zilliqa project.
Well, can you talk us through some of the things he's advised you on, given that, and I ask you this because, to be frank, there is information out there that people could make their own decisions on, but there are allusions to, a propensity for early exits in some instances for some projects. And there's no evidence necessarily to suggest that, or I certainly don't have it. But what's the kind of advice and the advisory role that Vincent does play when he does work with you?
I think he gives us many high-level sort of guidance. Let's say in the beginning, it was in terms of token structure. How do we design the token to make it really work? And then over the time of the project, you tell us now, for example, if you look at the market, what are kind of the applications people are excited about? Maybe you should take a look at as well. And then there are certain projects. Maybe look like these projects, learn from them. How do they run their community? How do they interact with people? How do they communicate? I think he gives us a lot of pointers to look at, and sometimes these pointers are very helpful.
Right. And do you still engage with all your advisors in different ways?
In some way, of course. I call some advisors more often than others. But yes, they are helpful in their own ways.
Right. Well, if we could talk about your ICO, just if we could recap, given that there has been essentially an ICO bubble, some could argue it's burst now, but could we do a bit of a metric cap on what you did raise, and what's come forth? I particularly want to know, how much did you save from that raise, given that there was a significant reduction in Ethereum? You raised in Ethereum. Did you save those dollars for the future, and how long have you got in your budget?
Yeah, I mean, we did not want to speculate at all. So we released in Ethereum, but really, if you want to pay bills, it has to be in US dollars or in
Right.
Singapore dollars. So the vast majority of it was cashed out in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you cashed out. So what does that enable? How long have you got on the books that you budgeted for, given that you cashed out and you filled your coffers so that you can run your business?
Yeah, so we planned the business for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So now I think it's more than 1 year past. So we have a runway about 3 to 4 years. That's how we budgeted. Of course, along the way we'll explore different ways to extend our runway as well by having different business opportunities. But even if nothing happens, I think we still have a runway of that.
Right. So you don't sound worried. You sound like you've got all of the financial backing that you through the ICO, through that token generation event.
I'm not worried. Financially speaking, I'm more sort of looking forward to figure out ways that we can drive adoption in a more efficient manner.
Right, and that is a challenge because we've noticed that quite a few of the first wave projects, Neo is a good example of this, is as we've seen this bear market really showcase a trajectory downward, trying to bolster interest in a very illiquid market that is current crypto, trying to, again, bolster interest and build out the Zilliqa economy so that people are utilizing that. That's a really big challenge that I think you're going to face in the next few years.
I think, as I said, the general interest or the overall interest is slowing down, but I am not convinced that that will actually affect the real use cases being adopted because these people are just interested in the technology and in the opportunities enabled by the technology. They may not be affected by whatever marketing movements that may happen.
Right. So just to finalize, what is the social media and marketing strategies to date? What's the plan forward, rather, in that if you want to focus on adoption, obviously you need to get the word out. What can you let the purchasers of Zilliqa know to ensure that you are continuing to spread the word to gain adoption?
I think, if I need to be very frank, I think we have also sort of surpassed the initial stage of this spreading the word. I mean, the initial stage of spreading the word is more about letting people know there's something called Zilliqa, it's doing sharding, it's very cool, things like that. But I think we have reached a stage where if we keep talking about just Zilliqa for the sake of talking about it, it's not that interesting. We have to show to the world what are the concrete use cases. And we start from there to attract people. Okay, these are the 5 use cases that are running on Zilliqa. They seem cool. Do we have some similar ideas, or do we have a better idea that can be inspired by some of these examples? That's why our marketing strategy will be more focused on developers. So you'll see us around in different developer events, different developer conferences. Sometimes we do our own meetups to interact with the developers, and then also in terms of branding for sort of taking leadership in specific verticals. So
and
this is roughly our strategy for.
And Xinshu, how will you break through the crypto sphere? Because again, if you go to most of these conferences, it's still within that microcosm that is what we're all part of. But how do you break into the mainstream so that people who have no knowledge of anything that's related to blockchain or crypto can engage even beyond the devs? Like, really, how are you going to access that huge market of 99% of the people on the planet that still really don't know anything about what we're talking about?
I don't have all the answers yet, but it's very clear to me that that's something we have to work on. We cannot just always talk to crypto people.
Right.
In the space, everyone loves each other. We help each other. That's good. But we have to break the crypto sphere, as you mentioned. We have to go to mainstream media. We have to preach that blockchain is not just for crypto people, but it can bring real business value to you.
Right.
I think we have to talk commercial. We have to show them that there's something very tangible. It can be either cost saving, or it can be opening up a new business line, or it can be that you can now work better with your partners. For example, the mindshare use case is very concrete. You can have 5-6 partners now working on the same platform. You can figure out ways to reduce your cost in a collective manner, in a collaborative manner. So these are the things we have to do. I hope I'll have better answers for you next time. But we are seeing good progress in terms of really working with real world use cases.
I'm really excited.
Those examples, you'll show to the world.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to also seeing you, engage with mainstream media like mainstream TV. And I'm sure that's going to happen in the future. But for now, Xinshu, it's been an absolute privilege speaking with you. You are the CEO of Zilliqa. Is there anything you'd like to say as a final statement for this interview? It's been long. I have wanted to cover a lot, but I really appreciate your time. And if you'd like to address to the people one final statement, go for it.
I think it was really a good conversation. I always want you to reach back and have this kind of thing. I think it's good. If you want to say anything, I think it's really a good time for us to pause a little bit and think about what are the things we want to do to really promote the adoption of the blockchain, rather than just looking at numbers, whatever number that may be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It has been very comprehensive. We learned a great deal. For those who don't know anything about Zilliqa, you can go and access a myriad of social media avenues. There's Twitter, there's Telegram, and there's, what else is there? There's also obviously the website. Is there anything else I've missed with regard to social media, Xinshu?
We have a forum as well. I think, if you want to discuss mining or things like that, you can go to our forum as well.
Sure. Well, you heard it from the boss. He's the CEO. Thank you very, very much for your time. We'll look forward to speaking with you again as you move out beyond in your mainnet. It's exciting to see Sharding leading the way in the Asian domain. Singapore is showing that it's really a force in blockchain, and you are certainly moving out into the globe. So I look forward to seeing you really evolve in 2019 and beyond. And until next time, it's been a privilege. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Brad.
You're welcome.